Good morning to everybody. Welcome to our first webinar of the series of webinars during the BCH-III capacity building project. Welcome again. It's very nice to see a lot of friends attending the webinar. And I will introduce Dr. Osama Abdelkawi, who will be our presenter today. Osama, could you please share your welcome?
Good afternoon, webinar participant, friends and colleagues. We welcome you on board here in the first webinar on the Cartagena protocol.
I'll make you a presenter, okay?
Okay, let's start.
You have the shock.
Good afternoon, webinar participants, friends and colleagues. We welcome you here on board on the first webinar on the Cartagena protocol. The presentation is quite expensive. It's quite extensive, so please bear with us. I'll first present myself. I'm Dr. Osama Abdelkawi. I'm a senior scientist at the Atomic Energy Authority, and I am the Anglophone Africa Regional Specialist under the project. My email is here elkawi@gmail.com, and this is my telephone number. Before we start, kindly note that this webinar is being recorded and will be published as a part of the BCH educational material. If you do not want to be recorded, please maintain your microphone muted and don't share your screen. We'd like also to highlight that the webinar's participant opinion and concept expressed here do not essentially reflect the UN Environment official position. And finally, it's important to mention that the official word about any aspect related to the Cartagena Protocol should be requested from the Secretary to the Convention on Biological Diversity. Now let's have an overview on the topics that will be covered during this webinar. We will start by having a very brief introduction to the Biosafety Clearinghouse Project Phase 3 and its virtual learning environment. This will be followed by an overview on the Cartagena Protocol and its main articles. And finally, we will have some time for discussion and question and answers. Starting by the BCH project Phase 3, it's a joint venture for the United Nations Environment and the Global Environmental Facility. The project has the full title of Project for Sustainable Capacity Building for Effective Participation in the Biosafety Clearinghouse. It's a global project with 76 participating countries. The project overall objective is to continue assisting eligible countries in strengthening national capacity to effectively access and use the BCH, promoting regional and sub-regional collaboration, networking and exchange of experience for national and regional BCH management. The project itself aims to ensure that participating countries have first established sustainable national procedure to gather information to put on the Biosafety Clearinghouse. Secondly, that those countries have the expertise to use, access, and participate efficiently in the Biosafety Clearinghouse. This will ultimately improve the country's compliance to the Cartagena Protocol. The project has 5 components, namely Component 1 on global and sub-regional networking and knowledge sharing of information for effective management of the biosafety clearinghouse. The second component on the production biosafety clearinghouse educational package in all 6 languages of the United Nations, and provision of virtual education tools. Now getting to the component 3 of the project is strengthening and sustainability of the regional advisor system, which support parties in effective participation in the biosafety clearinghouse. Component 4 is on assisting government official decision maker and key stakeholder to enhance their understanding and, where appropriate, appreciation of what they should or must place on the biosafety clearinghouse. Component 5 of the project is on the sustainability and awareness of the biosafety clearinghouse and national databases in coordination with the United Nations Agency and other information sharing initiatives on biosafety. The webinar is produced in the context of component 2 of the project. Now, moving to the virtual learning platform of the project. What is it about? The virtual learning environment is a tool to make all the BCH learning objects accessible to different target audience. It includes a variety of pre-developed training materials such as manual, interactive training software, case studies, and curricula for different stakeholders. Training materials are also organized as virtual courses over which customized national and regional training solution can be built. The virtual learning environment of the project can be accessed using the following link: vle.bch3-un.org. You can register to the virtual learning platform to get access to all courses by sending an email to admin@vle.bch3-un.org. You need to indicate clearly in the email your name, your surname, and your country. In the upcoming section, we'll talk about the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety and its relation with the Convention on Biological Diversity. We will also try to give a clear explanation on what is the purpose of the Cartagena Protocol and how does it work. Now, starting by the Convention on Biological Diversity, it's an international treaty that entered into force in 1992. It has mainly 3 objectives. First one is the conservation of biological diversity. Second one is the sustainable use of its component. And the third one is the fair and equitable sharing of the benefit arising out of the utilization of genetic resources. We will use the term party extensively in this presentation. Party means a state or regional economic integration organization that joined a convention and agreed to be legally bound by its provision. This is called party to the convention or party to a protocol. Now, having said that, the issue of safety in biotechnology is addressed in Article 8J and 19 Para 3 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, whose acronym is CBD. More specifically, Article 8J, it says that parties to the CBD are called upon to establish or maintain means to regulate, manage, or control the risk associated with the use and release of living modified organisms resulting from biotechnology, which are likely to have adverse impacts on the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. This is the text of Article 8J of the Convention on Biological Diversity. In Article 19, Para 3 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, it says that parties are called upon to consider the need for and modality of a protocol for the safe transfer, handling, and using biotechnologies that may have adverse effect on the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. So, taking into account the provisions above, the Conference of the Party to the Convention on Biological Diversity decided at its second meeting to develop a protocol on biosafety specifically focusing on the transboundary movement of living modified organisms that may have adverse effect on the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. So, in 1996, the Conference of the Party to the Convention established an open-ended ad hoc working group on biosafety to develop a draft protocol. This working group actually met 6 times between 1996 and 1999, and at its conclusion, at the last meeting, a draft protocol was submitted for consideration by the Conference of the Party in February 1999. And this was in Cartagena, Colombia. This is how the name of the protocol emerged. However, the Conference of the Party to the CBD was not able to finalize its work in Cartagena, and they reconvened and adopted the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety on January 2000 in Montreal, Canada. Thereafter, the protocol entered into force on September 2003 upon ratification by the 50th Party. Having said that, the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety is an international agreement concluded and adopted in the framework of the Convention on Biological Diversity. As of October 2017, the Cartagena Protocol has already 171 parties. As we already said, the party is a state or a regional economic integration organization that joined the protocol and agreed to be legally bound by its provision. In this regard, we have to say that only parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity may become parties to the Cartagena Protocol. Another term that we will use is the COPMOP. It's an acronym for the term Conference of the Party serving as a meeting of the party to the protocol. What does that body do? It keeps under regular review the implementation of the protocol and make decisions necessary to promote its effective implementation. This may include establishing necessary subsidiary bodies or considering and adopting as required amendment to the protocol and its annexes, as well as any additional annexes that are deemed necessary. So far, 8 conferences of the parties were conducted under the protocol. Before we start talking about the protocol in more details, let's first agree on some terms that are constantly used. The term living modified organism. We mean by living modified organism any living organism that possesses a novel combination of genetic material obtained through the use of modern biotechnology. But what is meant by modern biotechnology? Under the protocol, the wording modern biotechnology is used for the application of in vitro nucleic acid techniques, including recombinant deoxyribonucleic acid and direct injection of nucleic acid into cells or organelles, or the fusion of cells beyond the taxonomic family. This need to overcome natural physiological reproductive or recombination barrier, and that are not techniques used in traditional breeding and selection. This is a term that is used in the protocol and how it is defined. Also, we need to understand what is meant by biosafety. Under the Convention on Biological Diversity, and more specifically under the Cartagena Protocol, biosafety essentially refers to safety procedure aimed at regulating, managing, or controlling the risk associated with the release and use of living modified organisms resulting from biotechnology. Having said that, biosafety comprises multidisciplinary scientific fields, including but not limited to biology, ecology, microbiology, molecular biology, animal and plant pathology, entomology, agriculture, medicine, as well as legal, socioeconomic consideration, and public awareness. Now we go to the detail of the protocol is to contribute to ensuring an adequate level of protection in the field of the safe transfer, handling, and use of living modified organisms resulting from modern biotechnology that may have adverse effects on the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, taking into account risk to human health and specifically focusing on transboundary movement. The objective of a protocol is in accordance with the precautionary approach contained in Article 15 of the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development. And in this regard, we need to emphasize that the phrase may have adverse effects indicates adherence to the precautionary approach. Protection here is not called for only if the adverse effects are a certainty and have been established as such by full scientific evidence, but also if there is a threat of adverse effect. Now, moving to the scope of the protocol, it's stated in Article 4. It says this protocol shall apply to the transboundary movement, transit, handling, and use of all living modified organisms that may have adverse effect on conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, taking into account risk to human health. So basically, the protocol would apply to all transboundary movement, transit, and handling use of all living modified organisms. This is under Article 4. Article 5, it talks specifically on pharmaceutical. The exact text of Article 5, it says, notwithstanding Article 4 and without prejudice to any right of a party to subject all living modified organisms to risk assessment prior to the making of decision on import, this protocol shall not apply to the transboundary movement of living modified organisms which are pharmaceutical for humans that are addressed by other relevant international agreement or organization. And with regard to this article, there are several important remarks that need to be highlighted. First one is that all parties have the right to subject all living modified organisms to risk assessment prior to the making of decision on import. Second thing to highlight is that the protocol applies to all LMOs that are pharmaceutical for animals. And the third one is that pharmaceuticals that are LMOs for human to be excluded from the scope of the protocol, they need to be addressed by other relevant international agreement or organization. So far, this didn't happen, and this exclusion remains as an open door that has not been crossed. Now we move to this slide, try to understand how the protocol actually works. The protocol set out general obligation of parties. For example, obligation to take necessary and appropriate legal and administrative and other measures to implement that protocol. Another example for obligation is the obligation of a party to ensure that the development, handling, and transport, use, and transfer and release of living modified organisms are undertaken in a manner that prevent or reduce the risk to biological diversity. These are examples for obligation. It also sets general principles such as the right of a party to take action that is more protective for the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity than that called upon for in that protocol. Also, the right of a party to subject all living modified organisms to risk assessment prior to making any decision on import. Second thing, it established specific rules and procedures that are applicable to the transboundary movement of specific categories of living modified organisms. Example for the specific rule are the rules for the living modified organism intended to be introduced into the environment directly, and the rules for the LMOs that are intended to be directly used as food or feed or for processing. It also established and future evolution of the protocol. For example, the conference of the party serving as a meeting of the party to this protocol, and other subsidiary bodies like the compliance committee. The protocol also makes provision for capacity building and financial resource to assist developing countries and countries with economic in transition to implement the protocol. The scope of application of the protocol includes the following categories of LMOs. So the protocols talks about different categories of LMOs. First one is LMOs for intentional introduction into the environment. And the article that deals with that issue are articles from 7 to 10. LMOs for direct use as food or feed or for processing, and Article 11 of the protocol deals with that issue. We have LMOs that are in transit and LMOs that are destined for contained use. However, the protocol specified procedures that are applicable to the transboundary movement of only some of those categories. Procedure includes the following. First procedure that is specified in the Cartagena protocol is what we call the Advanced Informed Agreement procedure. The Advanced Informed Agreement procedure, it is specified in Article from 8 to 10 and Article 12 of the protocol. It applies for the first intentional transboundary movement of living modified organisms that are destined for intentional introduction into the environment of the party of import. So, if we intend to introduce that living modified organism intentionally in the environment, then those articles would apply, and we have to apply the Advanced Informed Agreement procedure. What are the main features of the Advanced Informed Agreement procedure? The parties of import is notified about the proposed import. Second thing, the party of import receives full information about the living modified organism and its intended use. And it assesses the risk associated with the living modified organism and decides whether or not to allow the import. These are the main features of the AII, or Advanced Informed Agreement. Now, moving to the details of how this is conducted. Under the Advanced Informed Agreement, we have that the party of export should notify or require the exporter to ensure notification in writing to the competent national authority of the party of import. This is how the procedure starts. So we have the party of export sending the notification to the competent national authority to the party of import. That notification should contain a minimum. At minimum, the information specified in Annex 1 of the Cartagena Protocol. And the party of export should ensure that there is a legal requirement for the accuracy of information provided by the exporter. This is on the part of the party of export or the exporter. Now going to the party of import, then it should acknowledge the receipt of notification in writing to the notifier within 90 days of the receipt. The acknowledgement should include the date of the receipt of the notification, whether the notification contains the required information primarily, and whether to proceed according to the domestic regulation of the party or according to the procedure applied in Article 10. This is what needs to be contained in the acknowledgement of receipt. And within 270 days of the date of the receipt of the notification, the party of import should communicate in writing to the notifier and to the biosafety clearinghouse its decision. The decision could be, for instance, approving the import with or without condition, including the decision on how to proceed on subsequent imports, prohibiting the import, requesting additional information, or informing the notifier that the period specified in this paragraph is extended by a defined period of time. It's important to highlight that in calculating the time within which the party of import is to respond, the number of days it has to wait for additional relevant information is not taken into account. So this is the advanced informed procedure for the living modified organism that is intended to be introduced into the environment. The second procedure under the protocol is for LMOs that are destined for direct use as food or feed or for processing. Article 11 of the protocols deals with such categories of LMOs. Those LMOs are not intended to be introduced into environments such as bulk grain exports. The procedure is specified in the protocol for the living modified organism intended for direct use as food or feed or for processing is as follows. A party that makes a final decision regarding domestic use, including placing on the market of a living modified organism that may be subject to transboundary movement for direct use as food or feed or for processing, within 50 days of making such decision should inform the party through the biosafety clearinghouse. The information should contain at minimum the information specified in Annex 2 of the Cartagena Protocol. It's important to highlight that the provision is not applied to decision regarding field trials. So the party would make, if it takes that decision, make it available through the BCH. It does not communicate that decision directly to anybody, just make it available on the biosafety clearinghouse. In addition to the decision, each party should make available to the biosafety clearinghouse copies of any national laws, regulation, guidelines applicable to the import of living modified organisms intended for direct use as feed or food or for processing if available. These mandates come from Article 11, Para 5. So it's not just the decisions that you make available on the biosafety clearinghouse, but all relevant national laws, regulation, and guidelines. Article 11, Para 6 deals with the situation where you don't have a national law or a domestic regulatory framework. It says that a developing country party or a party with economy in transition may, in the absence of domestic regulatory framework and in exercise of its domestic jurisdiction, declare through the BCH that its decision prior to the first import of living modified organism intended for direct use as food or feed or for processing, taking into account a risk assessment undertaken in accordance with Annex 3, and the decision made within a predictable time frame not exceeding 270 days. So if you don't have a domestic regulatory framework, you might use the BCH to declare your decision on how to proceed. Now, what is the main difference between those two procedures that we just described? The Advanced Informed Agreement, or AII procedure, it applies prior to the first intentional transboundary movement of living modified organisms for intentional introduction into the environment. And it's a bilateral process, actually. And based on direct communication between parties, it includes notification, acknowledgement of receipt, and decision is communicated with the notifier and at the same time published on the Biosafety Clearinghouse. While for the other procedure for living modified organisms intended for food or feed or for processing, it's essentially a multilateral information exchange mechanism centered on the BCH and no communication between parties occur. Now, moving to Article 12 of the protocol with regard to review of decision. The party of import may at any time, in the light of new scientific information, review and change a decision. In such situation, the party should within 30 days inform the notifier as well as the Biosafety Clearinghouse of its decision and set out the reason why it has changed the decision. Also, the party of export or the notifier may request the party of import to review its decision if there is a change in circumstances or new information become available. In such case, the party of import should respond in writing to such request within 90 days and set out the reason for its decision. Article 15 of the protocol, it talks about the issue of risk assessment. Risk assessment normally is undertaken pursuant to this protocol should be actually carried in a scientifically sound manner in accordance with Annex 3 of the protocol and taken into account recognized risk assessment techniques. With regard to risk assessment, several important points need to be highlighted. First one is that the cost of risk assessment is borne by the notifier if the party of import so requires. Second thing is that the party of import should ensure that risk assessments are carried out for decision taking under Article 10 of the protocol. Important other things to highlight is the right of a party to subject all living modified organisms to risk assessment prior to making a decision on imports. Now going to Article 17 of the protocol, it talks about unintentional transboundary movement and emergency measures. What this article is about, it says when a party knows of occurrence of a release of an LMOs within its jurisdiction, And this release may lead to unintentional transboundary movement. It needs to notify potentially affected states, the BCH relevant and relevant international organization. About that issue. The notification, it should contain the available information on estimated quantities, relevant characteristic or trait of the living modified organism, the circumstances and estimated date of the release, the possible adverse effect of the living modified organism, any other relevant information, and a point of contact for further information. So if you know that a release happened in your country and that release could be the cause of unintentional transboundary movement, you need to notify not just the parties, but all affected states, even if they are not bounded by the protocol. And also you need to consult with them, aiming to minimize any significant adverse effect. Parties should immediately consult the potentially affected state to enable them to determine the appropriate responses and initiate necessary action, including emergency measures. Now, what are the primary mandates or obligation of a party once it has ratified the Cartagena Protocol and it entered into force into that country? First obligation would be to designate one national focal point to be responsible on its behalf for the liaison with the Secretariat. Also to designate one national focal point for the biosafety clearinghouse to liaise with the Secretariat regarding the issue of relevant to the development and implementation of the biosafety clearinghouse. It also needs to provide the BCH with the details of the point of contact for receiving notification for unintentional transboundary movement. It needs to notify the Secretariat of the name and addresses of the national focal point and competent national authorities. So you mainly designate national focal points, 3 of them, national focal point for the Cartagena Protocol, national focal point for the biosafety clearinghouse, and a contact point for the unintentional transboundary movement. This is related to Article 17 of the protocol, and you need to provide the name and address of the national focal points and the competent national authority for the protocol. Now, moving to Article 20 of the protocol that deals essentially with the biosafety clearinghouse. Biosafety clearinghouse was established as a part of the clearinghouse mechanism under Article 18, Para 3 of the Convention in order to facilitate the exchange of scientific, technical, environmental, and legal information and exchange with and experience with living modified organisms, and to assist parties to implement the protocol taking into account special needs of developing country parties. So, biosafety clearinghouse is mainly a tool to implement the protocol, and it facilitates the exchange of all information that are relevant to living modified organisms. Under Article 20 of the protocol, some relevant articles like Article 19 and also some COPMOP decision, the parties have the mandate to make certain information available to the BCH, such as the national contacts, as we already said, the national focal points, the competent national authorities, also the national laws and regulations and guidelines that are relevant to the implementation of the protocol, any bilateral, regional, or multilateral agreement and arrangement, summaries of risk assessment or environmental reviews of living modified organisms, final decision regarding the importation or release of living modified organisms, and reports that are relevant to Article 33 of the protocol, including those on the implementation of the Advanced Informed Agreement procedure. Additional issues under the protocol. Article 13 of the protocol, it talks about the simplified procedure. What is the simplified procedure? Simplified procedure means a party can specify in advance to the biosafety clearinghouse cases in which the import of living modified organisms may take place at the same time as transboundary movement is notified to it, or imports of LMOs that it has decided to exempt from the Advanced Informed Agreement procedure. So namely, the country will publish on the biosafety clearinghouse saying, okay, we don't need the Advanced Informed Agreement to apply for those specific LMOs, and you can just notify us at the time that this transfer or this transport is conducted. However, the countries to decide to subject specific LMOs to simplified procedure needs to ensure that adequate measures are applied to ensure safe international transboundary movement of living modified organisms. Article 18 of the protocol talks about the handling, transport, packaging, and identification. It's important to highlight in this regard that Article 18 of the protocol mandated parties to take necessary measures requiring that living modified organisms that are subject to intentional transboundary movement are handled, packaged, and transported under conditions of safety, taking into consideration relevant international rules and standards. However, some relevant points, such as the need for and modality of developing standards with regard to identification, handling, packaging, and transport practice, were left out to the conference of the party to decide upon later, as clearly indicated in Article 18, Para 3. So this is one of the issues that has not been completely agreed upon at the time of the negotiation and adoption of the protocol. Finally, we go to the issue of liability and redress. The issue of liability and redress was another of those topics that needed further elaboration and discussion and was not settled at the time of the adoption of the Cartagena Protocol. Article 27 of the protocol mandated the conference of the party, serving as meeting of the party, to the protocol to adopt at its first meeting a process with respect to the appropriate elaboration of international rules and procedures in the field of liability and redress for damage resulting from transboundary movement of living modified organisms. Several years later, the process led to the Nagoya-Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on Liability and Redress to the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. So this is similar to the methods that has been used to develop the Cartagena Protocol. The Cartagena Protocol merged from the Convention on Biological Diversity and the issue of liability and redress was not completely settled in the Cartagena protocol, so an additional protocol was needed to be developed, and this led to the supplementary protocol on liability and redress. Now, thank you, and we can go ahead with the question and answers. You can raise your hand if you have any question. I don't see that anybody's asking for the floor.
Yeah, Osama, there's a question from Alexei.
Okay, so
There's a question from Samantha. Samantha is asking if this is a one-time webinar or will be a continuous series. It will be a continuous series with several different subjects, and the recording will be available also for all the registered participants.
So I didn't find Alexei's question. What?
He says that the microphone is not working, but he will write the question.
He can type it in the chat and we will respond to him. So I guess Ernest already replied. So the webinar will be reproduced in different language. So this webinar will be produced in Arabic and in French. And this is on the issue of introduction to the Cartagena protocol. But we will have a series of webinars that are handling different issues, like using the BCH to find information or to register information and several other topics. Yes, in fact, the recording will be available after this session is completed. You will be notified by email, I guess, and you can access the recording. And also, we will upload that recording to the virtual learning platform to be used later as a part of the training material.
There's a question from Alex there. Do you see it, Osama?
Will the recording be available after the session is completed? This one?
No, there's another one from Alex. He said, you said that Article 11 involves only interaction between party of import and the BCA. However, in practice, Article 11.6 is triggered by application of exporter-importer.
Well, actually, Article 11, it does not involve a direct relation between the importer and the parties of import and the party of export. And this is what makes it different from the article that talk about advanced informed agreement. So for the advanced informed agreement, there is a direct contact between the party of import and the party of export, and the decision is published on the BCH. However, for the issue of food and feed or for processing, the parties actually, if they intend to use it nationally or domestically, just publish that decision on the BCH. So the situation where the part of that living modified organism have been exported to another country does not involve a notification to that country unless that country requires so. So it's not like a mutual communication between two countries or two parties.
Hello, Osama. Can you hear
me? Yeah, I can hear you at
because
last.
now Mike is working. It was excellent presentation. Thank you very much. What I had in mind is, of course, there is no mention of other party or any other entity in Article 11, but on practice, you will not make decision about import in your country unless somebody approaches you with that type of request, you know, in practice. It must be some kind of importer involved in the whole procedure. Although you're right, there is no mention of that entity in Article 11. But usually you don't make decision if somebody is not asking for some stuff to be imported.
Yeah, but the issue here is that we are not talking about the importation. If you, for example, a research center have produced nationally an LMOs, and your country have decided that you will be using it domestically in the country, sometimes that part of what you already have nationally may be exported to another country. And in this situation, if the country does not publish that if an LMO that is for food or for feed or for processing need to be notified to that country, they will never know. You don't have the mandate to tell them. The mandate is only for things that are intended to be introduced into the environment. So
yes, but
in your
country, if they make, well, let me introduce myself. I'm Alexei Tarasyev. I'm head of a biosafety committee in Serbia, in Belgrade. I'm an evolutionary biologist. So when you make that type of notification, then in order to make the decision, you must be approached by importer. So there, in practice, you usually have other, but you're totally right. It's not mentioned in the protocol as two parties interacting. Like in Article 7, you have parties of import and parties of export, and here you don't have.
Okay, thanks, Alexei.
We have Osama. We have a hand raised by Mary Mom. I will open the microphone for her.
Okay.
Mary, please go ahead.
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Yes. I've got a question. Dr. Osama was saying products of LMOs should, when a country is producing products of LMOs, they should notify the other parties. When, for example, when trucks are transporting these products from country A to country B, so that the products may not be spilled to the environment. Are you?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you. Well, if we talk about labeling the product themselves, it falls under Article 18 of the protocol. How the product itself is labeled to reveal that it may contain LMOs and other specification. Yeah, this exists. But saying if this product is not intended to be introduced directly into the environment, then the advance informed agreement does not apply. If you do not say in your national law that if a product contains LMOs, you need to notify me in advance, you might not get a notification. So this issue is solved under your national law. It's not a specification by the protocol. The protocol applies only for the LMO that will be introduced into the environment. In such situation, you will only get a notification. But even for the product or LMOs that are for food or for feed or for processing, you don't get notification under the protocol if this is not specified in your national law. So did I answer your question?
My other question is, let's say in your country, your framework does not accommodate new and emerging technologies, and other products are coming from other countries, passing through your country. How do you deal with that?
Well, first thing is that you put a decision on your National Biosafety Clearinghouse specifically saying that those measures apply, and if you are exporting to us a product that contains an LMOs, you need to notify us in advance. This is the minimum requirement or the minimum things for you to get notification. If you don't have a law and if you have not published a decision on the Biosafety Clearinghouse, the other party does not have any mandate to notify you. Because under the protocol, a party to the protocol need to establish measure, legal, administrative, on how to manage the issue of living modified organisms and how to deal with that. So the minimum requirement for a country that doesn't have a law is to publish a decision specifying that we need you to notify us in advance for the product. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? It seems not. So, Osama, if you allow me, I will just show a slide with the next.
Okay.
Next. Oh, sorry, we have a hand from Malaki. Hi, Malaki. How are you doing? Go ahead, please.
I'm doing great, thanks. I'm dealing with the transboundary movement, especially in Caribbean countries, which are adjacent to each other, which are very close to each other. So if, let's say, Grenada, I have introduced in Grenada a transgenic fish, or the other way around, the Canada have developed a transgenic fish, which Grenada is importing. But because of the proximity, Grenada and St. Vincent, probably if I grow that fish in Grenada, it may be able to move over to St. Vincent. What are the steps that should be taken?
Okay, that's what we already discussed actually under Article 17 of the protocol. It talks about unintentional transboundary movement and emergency measure. That article, it put the mandate of a party that if they know of the occurrence of the release of the LMOs in their own jurisdiction, and that LMOs may unintentionally be subject to a transboundary movement, they need to notify the potentially affected countries. in a river and that river is shared by several countries, or if you are doing experiment near the borders and a neighboring country may be affected, you are mandated by the protocol to notify them of that issue. And you need also to make relevant information on the quantities, characteristic traits of living modified organisms, the estimated date of release. Not just give them information, but also consult with them on how to mitigate the effect. If you just know that this happened in your own jurisdiction. So I guess Article 17 of the protocol answer your question. And for each country, it needs to nominate a point of contact for the emergency measure. And that country which is doing the release, if it knows that this release may affect that country, it contacts directly the emergency measure contact point and start consulting with them on how to deal with that situation. And the article says potentially affected country. So it doesn't have to be that the unintentional transboundary movement happened. But if they may be affected, you need to consult with them and provide information to them as well.
Okay, if there are no more questions, Osama, I will thank you very much for your very nice online webinar. And let me take the talk a bit just to show what are the next webinars that we will have this week. Thank you very much, Osama.
Thanks.
Okay, just do you see my screen, Osama?
Yeah.
Okay. For this week, we will have this same webinar about the introduction to the Cartagena protocol tomorrow in French at 10 a.m. GMT. I will also upload this slide to the handouts for the webinar, so you can have the links there. On Thursday, we will have the same one in Arabic language, also at 10 a.m. GMT. And on Friday, the 1st December, we will talk about the Cartagena protocol roster of experts and how to apply and submit the nomination to participate in the roster of experts. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Osama, for your nice presentation. Thank you, everybody, for attending our webinar, and we look forward to seeing you soon in the next webinars.
Thanks to Ernesto, and thanks webinar participant. And hopefully we see you in our next webinars.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.